Welcome to Voices of WIA. This is the show by Women in Apologetics, which seeks to equip you to defend your faith with confidence. My name is Laura Powell, and I'll be your host. Today, we'll be discussing a topic that can be very heavy and challenging to address. But even so, it is not outside the hope we have in Jesus. The impact of same-sex marriage may not be something that has impacted you directly yet, but ever since the redefinition of marriage that took place during the Obama administration, we have seen our society stray further away from God's original design for marriage and family. And we've seen not only the legalization, but also the widespread celebration of behaviors that were once considered sinful and harmful. Our guest today, Katy Faust, founder of Them Before Us, is going to help us navigate through this topic from the perspective of children whose parents are in a same-sex relationship. Now, before we bring on our guest, I'd like to invite you to participate in something really worthwhile and excellent by partnering with us through our end-of-year fundraiser. WIA is a 501c3 nonprofit, so all of our donations are used to sustain this ministry and produce great resources and content, whether that's through our social media channels, our website, our newsletter, our events, or our educational opportunities. At this time, we have reached 55% of our goal to raise $35,000 by December 31st. If you've been blessed in any way by the content and resources we produce at Women in Apologetics, we encourage you to partner with us in our mission to educate, equip, and encourage women through Christian apologetics by giving a gift of any amount. For those who give a minimum of $30 toward our end-of-year fundraiser, we will send you an exclusive thank you gift of our Love Came Down Family Edition ebook on November 26th. If you're interested in giving, please go to womeninapologetics.com/donate. We would also be grateful if you would partner with us through your prayers, that God would continue to provide what we need to sustain and grow Women in Apologetics. Thank you so much for your partnership and prayers. Now to today's conversation. If this is your first time meeting Katy, let me introduce her to you. Katy Faust is founder and director of Them Before Us. She received her undergraduate degree in political science and Asian Studies at St. Olaf College, and then received a Fulbright scholarship to Taiwan. Her fluency in Mandarin assisted her when she worked with the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world. She publishes widely on the rights of children and is a regular contributor at The Federalist. Katy is the Washington state leader for the grassroots marriage movement, Canavox, and currently appears in their video series, Dear Katy. She is married to a pastor, and she is the mother of 4 children, the youngest of whom is adopted from China. Welcome, Katy. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's very exciting. I love the Q&A. I love the live stream, and I love doing it all together. So I'm honored to be here.
That's great. We're so excited to have you. And I'm really excited to discuss this topic today because many people don't really understand how growing up in a family formed by same-sex parents can be detrimental to children and their development. But first, let's talk about marriage itself. In your book, you define and argue for marriage between a man and a woman in terms that seem to originate from a secular perspective, specifically in relation to public policy, which may seem odd or even controversial to other Christians. Can you tell us what you believe is the definition of marriage and what do you base this on?
Yeah. So what we try to do at Them Before Us is we look at everything from the perspective of the child. We begin with the child. We actually kind of are copying a little bit this strategy, the very effective strategy of the pro-life movement, where the pro-life movement actually begins with children's rights, the humanization of the child, right? Focusing on the child as an individual that deserves rights and protection. Well, children have rights on this side of the womb as well. And other than their right to life, their primary right is their right to be known and loved by their mother and father. These two people specifically do incredible things for kids. The first one is it grants them something that no other adults can give them, and that's biological identity, something that they know who they are because of they know from whom they came. Number two, it statistically gives them the safest, most invested and most protective adults in their life, even though we do know that there are some abusive biological parents. Statistically, a child's own mother and father are the safest adults in their life. And finally, it gives them gender balance, the perfect complementarity of male and female in their life and their home every day. And so when we look at children's rights to their mother and father, when we look at the benefits that they get from being in relationship with both of them every day, we see that it's in the state's interest to incentivize that man and woman committing to one another for life so the child can have both their mom and dad and all of the benefits that go along with that for life as well. So we look at the issue of marriage through the lens of children's rights. And as we'll discuss later, we look at every marriage and family issue from that lens as well.
Okay, yeah, that's actually one of my favorite aspects of the case that you make and the argument you make. But I want to hear from you. Why do you make distinctions between your definitions and arguments based on a biblical framework and your approach in the public square?
Yeah, great question. I'm a pastor's wife. I'm like a total religious zealot, literally. I carry my Bible with me everywhere I go. I read the Bible with almost everybody that I'm with. I think I've got like 5 Facebook friends that I met on a plane at some point, and we read the Bible together and like shared our hearts together. And so I love scripture. Scripture is my ultimate authority. But when I'm making a case for public policy, scripture is not the authority that everybody else recognizes. And so I think that Christians have actually failed to make the case for marriage, which is fundamentally an issue of justice for children. When we fail to make that case effectively, that usually happens because we are basing it on an authority that we recognize, but our neighbor does not. And so that's what I've tried to do with Them Before Us as a movement, but especially in our book, is to give compelling secular answers and reasoning for why we should promote marriage and make every marriage and family issue one that is child-centric, because we are appealing to the common authority of our neighbors, which is natural law. That is the natural world and how we know what we ought to do based on the natural world. That is a perspective supported by reality, the reality of social science, the reality of biology, the reality of human behavior. And we also appeal to the authority of the Constitution. And what is the Constitution? And ultimately what our laws say, our constitutional rights say about this issue. So that's what we try to do in the book, is appeal to the common authority so that we actually have a common language that we can use when we're speaking to our friends and family about this.
Absolutely. That's so excellent. Actually, my undergraduate degree is in public policy, and there was never an occasion in all the papers I was asked to write, in all of the persuading I was expected to do, there was never an occasion that I can recall when it was persuasive or even acceptable to say, well, the Bible says so.
Right.
And so I absolutely agree. I think that Christians have failed. We've fallen really short by not being able to make a case beyond just saying the Bible says so. Mm-hmm. I love that you do that in your book. I love that I can give this book to absolutely anybody and say, what do you think about this? How do you find these arguments? Do you find them persuasive? And I don't need to even be concerned with people coming back and saying, well, I don't believe the Bible. So this is an outstanding approach. I love your approach, and I would love to see Christians take this approach on every issue. And I love that you take that approach on this all important issue that really is not going to have a lot of headway if we're just saying the Bible says or Christianity says. So,
well, and if you don't mind, I'll jump in and say, I think especially your listeners are probably thankfully have a very good grasp on what God says about sex and marriage. Mm-hmm. Our book is going to tell you why his prescriptions are so good, and ultimately
Mhm.
why his prescriptions actually accomplish one of the mandates for Christians, which is the protection of the least of these, right? The
Mhm.
safeguarding of the most vulnerable among us. So they will go hand in hand, right? If you're looking at this from a natural law, social science perspective, all you're going to get is the total validation of God's design for sex and marriage.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, that's excellent. So, and let me ask you another question. What are the different scenarios in which a child becomes part of a same-sex family?
That's one thing that we try to make clear. And actually, I'll even broaden it out and say that we talk a lot about modern family, right? And that same sex parents kind of fall under the umbrella of modern families, which is the idea of like, we don't need to stick to kind of the conventional idea of mother, father, child. We can have a modern family that looks a lot different than all of that. And so, one of the most popular manifestations of the modern family is two moms or two dads. But what we talk with our followers about is modern family is just code for child loss.
Hmm.
That's it.
Wow.
Anytime a child is in a modern family or in a family with same sex parents, they had to lose something, something they had a natural right to be in that family. So when you're talking about same sex adults, when you're talking about two moms or two dads, the child had to find themselves in that household through one of four different paths of loss. Either one of their parents died, which is tragic, rare, but tragic and possible that one of their parents died and then their biological parent repartnered with somebody of the same sex. More common is that there was a divorce, right, where they left a previous relationship where they had created children with an opposite sex partner and then repartnered with someone of the same sex. So the child has experienced the demise of their first family unit so they could be in the same sex household. The third way is through reproductive technologies that they intentionally separated the child from their genetic parent at conception so that they could then raise the child from birth. And the fourth possibility is that the child was abandoned or orphaned by their parents, and then the child came to be in that same sex home through adoption. So all of those paths include loss for the child. Some of those, the majority of them, have to do with adult desire being prioritized above the rights of children. But no matter how you splice it, you know, what we talk to our followers about when it comes to same-sex parenting is really when you're looking at a child with two moms or two dads, you're looking at a child who is missing their mom or dad. That's really the way to kind of look at it, honestly, is the child has to lose their mother or father to be in that home.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of the phrases that you keep using is a child's right,
Mhm.
and I love that you distinguish appropriately between a child's right naturally versus a right that the government gives people or does not give to people. I often hear people today talking about rights as if they are whatever the government says they are
Mhm.
or whatever an individual says they
Right.
are. And so rights become all kinds of things. And then next thing we know, we find that we're declaring things as rights that involve taking away from the rights of other people. And so I love how you lay out in the from the very beginning of the book a distinction between what is a right versus what the government says, and how do you decide what a right is? How can we identify them and such? So that's foundational to your argument. I would that I think that's a really important point that you make there. So you argue that a child in a same-sex family is missing a vital role in their development.
Mhm.
What is that uh, impact that we see in children who have either no mother or no father in the home, and
Yeah.
what's going on there?
Yeah. So, um, you know, we talk in the book quite a bit about how there's three staples of a child's social emotional diet, right? If you think about your physical diet and the things that you need to physically thrive, it's like fruits and vegetables, like starches and proteins, right? So, you can look at that from a social emotional perspective from the child's development. And that is like mother's love, father's love, and stability. And of course, kids need more than just mother's love, father's love, and stability. But if they don't have mother's love, father's love, or stability, they are going to be emotionally malnourished, right? And so there's a lot of different kids who are missing some different aspect of that fundamental staples of their development. And that does make it hard to thrive. For example, we see that kids who have experienced family breakdown struggle in school. They have more physical ailments. They deal with more behavioral issues. They have higher rates of depression and anxiety, substance abuse, right? In fact, almost every social ill that we are facing today in our country, from youth homelessness to youth poverty, to higher incarceration rates for kids, to school dropouts, to teen pregnancy. I mean, like every single thing that we are battling has something in common, and that is children who have been denied their mother's love, their father's love, or stability. These are kids that have disproportionately suffered family breakdown. And so what is it about mother's love and father's love that are so precious and valuable for kids that no Head Start program or no school counselor or no welfare check could ever replace? Like, what is that? And it is that men and women interact distinctly with their children. Men are different than women. Gender is not a social construct. Gender and biological and sex differences are innate, wired in our brains and our bodies. And the most important place where those differences are expressed is in the theater of the home, right? In parenting. And so let's just speak generally about the beautiful, distinctive differences that men and women offer to their children. First of all, and a lot of you moms are going to get this right away, right? Moms tend to be a little more focused on the immediate emotional well-being of their children. Equity, fairness, are you okay? If they seem distressed, mothers have this incredible ability to soothe their babies, right? All of us just do it innately. Even those of us who, I didn't really think that I was like super mom, like super baby oriented, but man, like, there's something that just clicks for you where you just start soothing and nurturing. Dads, you hand a baby to a mom, she holds and she starts rocking. You hand a baby to a dad, and within 20 seconds, that baby is in the air, right? He's got the baby throwing up and down, all of that, and that's incredible, right? Moms literally, like physically, will project safety for the child, and dads will give them risk and adventure, even when they're 8 months old. We were at a home community 2 nights ago, and the mom was holding the baby, handed the baby to the dad, and the dad just held the baby above his head, like holding his tummy like this. He's a 6-month-old. Baby loved it. I mean, like, nobody told the dad, hey, you should swing the child around. That's what dads do, and kids really benefit from it. So moms tend to focus on immediate emotional well-being. Dads tend to focus a little bit on pushing kids outside of their comfort zone and taking appropriate risks. Moms tend to focus on things like fine motor skills, chopping vegetables at the counter, cutting out little crafts. Dads focus on gross motor skills, running, jumping, climbing, igniting. I mean, they just tend to be bigger, stronger, faster. And of course, not everybody, mom and dad, are going to fit this to a T, but generally, this is what sociologists have observed. They talk to their kids differently. They discipline them differently. They encourage them to look at the world differently. And it's not just a switch that men can switch on, a mothering switch. They don't. They can't. Right? Men don't mother and women don't father, and kids need both. And when kids don't have one or the other, oftentimes you can see the impact, the detrimental impact on their heart or their development or their outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that really struck me throughout the book was the different types of impact that we see in children who grew up with 2 mothers or with 2 fathers, and how, you mentioned the whole array earlier, or at least a good sampling, but yeah, from criminality to education to relationships, depression, likeliness of divorce, healthy relationships versus unhealthy relationships themselves. It's really quite striking that there is such a benefit that's clearly measurable when one parent is missing. And, I often hear people say when I make an argument, when I make a case using studies or statistics or something, people will try to find the outlier, and they might say, in this case, for example, well, I'm a woman and I like to toss my baby. Um, I actually do like to toss babies in the air, but I don't have any, so I've not I've not been put away for life yet. But how do you respond then to someone who says, well, I don't fit that mold, and so maybe there are other women who don't fit that mold or men who don't fit that mold, and so why can't we make policy from from these examples that may be
Yeah,
outliers?
great. That's such a good question. People take note. You should ask questions like that in the chat, because let's do all the hardest questions today. So here's a few things. You're right. Not every woman is exactly the same. Not every guy is exactly the same. For example, I'm not very emotional. My husband is much more of a deep feeler. And so when my kids are sad, he'll go in there and rub their back. Oh, honey, are you okay? And he'll call me, Katie, go nurture. I'm like, hey, honey, I'm in here if you need me. You're gonna be fine, right? So we don't fit that mold perfectly. But here's the deal, right? Because what you're trying to say is, if we don't fit these superficial stereotypes, that means men and women are interchangeable. That means two moms and two dads is no problem. But here's the problem. When a child is living in the home with two moms or two dads, it's not just that they don't have a stereotypically feminine or a stereotypically masculine presence. It is that they are missing a parent. Let's talk about why that's detrimental for them. 3 reasons. Number 1, that means they always suffered trauma. They've had to suffer the trauma of the loss of a parent through death, divorce, abandonment, and even if they're subsequently adopted, that's still traumatic, or the trauma of being intentionally severed from a parent at conception, right? So the first one is trauma. The second one is they are missing that maternal or paternal love that they crave. And this is what we call in the book mother hunger and father hunger, that you can't just cut out masculine influence and the kid's okay, right? They're going to hunger for the love of a man or hunger for the love of a woman if that's cut out of their life. Because like food, they will crave it every day. One of the things that we do at Them Before Us, one of the things you're going to see in the book, is we catalog the stories of kids who have suffered the mother loss or father loss because adult desire was prioritized above their right. And there's plenty of kids that I've interviewed that are in the secret group chats that I run that are profiled in the book. Some of them say, well, I had a more feminine mom and I had a more butch mom. I mean, those are their words, not mine, right? So supposedly that works with the scenario that you're presenting here. Well, here's a more stereotypical woman and here's a more masculine woman. I have yet to hear a kid in that situation go, wow, that butch mom, she met all of my needs for a father. They don't say that, right? Because they don't actually just need somebody who presents themselves as more masculine. They need their father. They crave their father. They want their father. And here's the third thing. That missing father gives them something that the more masculine mother could never give, and that is their biological identity. That butch mom cannot give them the answers to the questions of who am I, much of which will come from knowing your biological heritage, your genetic identity, your extended kinship networks, right? Why is it that these kids who are created through reproductive technologies are now scouring the internet to find the person who supposedly was just a donor? It's because most of them would say, that father, that donor is half of who I am. And I don't know who I am until I know who he is. So I don't say men and women are different for the sake of saying these are superficial stereotypes. I say men and women are different because these are biological realities that have been widely observed across almost all societies, literally measurable to the point where sociologists will say men don't mother and women don't father. So different are the ways that they interact with children. And then hopefully yank away that excuse that this is just about, people who act a certain way. It's not, right? These are biologically ingrained differences that kids actually need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent answer. Great reasons. Yeah, a woman can be a mother who tosses her children in the air and climbs 14,000-foot mountains and goes on roller coasters and even wrestles, but she can't be a father. So
Right.
yeah, that's an excellent distinction. So we are going to take a quick break from asking Katy questions, and we have a book giveaway. So our gift today is the book Them Before Us by our guest, Katy Faust. We are so excited to give away a copy of this book to someone in our audience. Katy, why don't you actually go ahead and tell us what prompted you to write this book?
I did an interview with Eric Metaxas actually a couple of years ago, and he was like, "Man, I've never heard this before. This is really fascinating. You should write a book." And I was like, "You're insane. Look at my life. Like, I'm a mother of 4. I'm totally overwhelmed. I'm trying to run a nonprofit. My husband's a pastor. I'm deeply involved in our church. Like, I can barely make it to soccer carpool on time. How could I ever write a book?" But he said, "Okay, but your movement's going nowhere if you don't put this all together for somebody to, if you can't put this all together for people to really understand what you're trying to communicate, your movement's going nowhere." And I was like, okay. So that's what prompted me to do it. And the incredible thing is I've got a wonderful co-author. So not only is the material great, it's actually a good read because she is a really gifted editor and writer. So, we're talking about heavy stuff, but hopefully you'll also find yourself kind of laughing and chuckling through because she's just got the golden touch when it comes to the keyboard.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will second that. It is a great read. It's actually humorous on a very heavy and difficult subject. It's easy to read, it's logical, it's well backed up with lots and lots of data, lots of studies, lots of testimonies that are really interesting as well. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. This book is so excellent, and I have been recommending it to everybody I've talked to over the past couple of months. And so I would encourage all of our viewers to order this book, read this book, tell your friends about this book. But for right now, we have a winner who is going to receive this book, Compliments of Women in Apologetics. And our winner is Bim Oyediran. I am so sorry about how I said that. I am sure that's probably not right, but Bim Oyediran is the best I can do. Congratulations to our winner. And I hope that you will love this book as much as I have. I hope that it will be beneficial to you and to the people you talk to. Now, if you didn't win, we still have something for you. We are launching our second ebook devotional called Love Came Down on November 26th. This is a free 30-day apologetics devotional on the birth and life of Jesus. All you have to do is become an email subscriber and you'll automatically receive it on launch day. Our moderators will be posting the link so you can subscribe today and get your free copy of Love Came Down on November 26th. We're so excited for you to use it this Christmas. I have been reading through the articles, the drafts over the past few weeks, and it's excellent. You're going to want to get this. Go through it with a friend, by yourself, with your family. It's absolutely excellent. And we have so many great apologists and artists who have contributed to it, and I'm sure that you will love that as well. We also have some really great merch from Women in Apologetics. I'm saving up to get some of these shirts myself, but check out our merch at the link that our moderators will post, and go ahead and order some of that for yourself, for your friends, for Christmas, family, and enjoy the beautiful new merchandise that Women in Apologetics is offering. Let's return to this discussion about the book with Katy. Katy, we often hear that the only thing children need to thrive is love. So how do you respond to that? Isn't love the most important thing for children, regardless of who it comes from?
Love is very important, and I would even say most of the time people say kids just need to be safe and loved, right? Because we all understand that safety is a major issue, which it is, right? And I also believe that children need to be safe and loved, but we don't have to guess at how that comes about. We've been studying family structure for decades, and sociologists know exactly the factors that will set a child up to be safe and loved. And overwhelmingly, statistically, that is in the home of their married biological mother and father. And once you step away from that household structure, when it's not their own married mom and dad, what you see is elevated risks of abuse and neglect, disconnectedness, and instability. Now, I know heroic step parents out there. You know heroic step parents out there. But the reality is that statistically, if we want children to be safe and loved, we will incentivize their own biological parents getting married to one another and staying together for life and raising them. Anything else is going to insist that the child accept some brokenness so the adults can choose a different path. Now, sometimes there are tragic situations why that is not the case. A parent dies. Maybe there are situations where a divorce is necessary because of abuse or addiction or abandonment. But in general, we have to be very clear that if we want children to be safe and loved, then we will encourage mothers and fathers marrying one another and raising their own children together. We go through in chapter 2 why biological parents, or what we know from the studies about biology and the incredible level of connectedness and protectiveness that offers children. We go through studies that talk about how biological parents invest more time in their children than stepchildren, for example. They invest more money in their children than unrelated adults. They tend to be more protective, right? Children who are in homes with unrelated adults, unfortunately, suffer drastically higher rates of abuse or just suffer accidents more often. There is some kind of protective covering that comes from a biological parent. We talk and discuss in chapter 2 about the very well-known and widely acknowledged evolutionary biologist theory called the Cinderella effect, which is exactly what it sounds like. That when there is a step parent in the home, or for example, mother's boyfriend in the home, statistically, that man is the most dangerous person in a child's life. So what we see from a children's rights perspective is if we are serious about children being safe and loved, then you're one of us. Then you are on the children's rights train. Then you, if you really want children to be safe and loved, then we will throw out the idea of modern families in terms of that being a equally beneficial option for kids, and recognize that, nope, if we want to set kids up for success, then we will recognize that their biological parents married to one another is the best chance that a child is going to be safe and loved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have quite the abundance of studies in your book that support that. So yeah, I imagine people again saying, but I know so-and-so heroic step parent, or
Yeah.
like you said, and one thing that you say repeatedly is the problem is not the two mothers.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is the absent father, or the problem is not the two fathers who are raising the child. The problem is the missing mother. And so, yeah, we all know heroic step parents. I certainly do. And but the studies are quite compelling.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to studies, you also gather plenty of testimonials in your book from teens and adults who talk about their experiences in non-traditional families. What are some of the common themes that keep coming up in those?
Yeah, well, we kind of break things down into 3 different categories, right? Children of divorce and abandonment, children with LGBT parents, and children created through reproductive technologies. So those are the 3 broad groups where children's rights are being sacrificed because adult desire is prioritized above their rights. And like I said, there are some justifiable reasons for divorce, but the reality is about 70% of divorces today don't take place because of adultery, abuse, or abandonment. It's just because the parents have fallen out of love. So what is it that those kids experience as a result? Well, you think about the 3 staples of a child's social emotional diet: mother's love, father's love, and stability. Post-divorce, all 3 of those are impacted. Even in the best case scenario, kids are only getting 50% of mother's love, 50% of father's love, and usually stability is completely gone. Instability is the main reality for kids after a divorce. And so we see that those kids who are impacted by divorce, they actually suffer emotionally, academically, mentally, and even physically, um, oftentimes all their life. So we have a whole chapter on divorce. We think divorce has been around for such a long time, it's really no big deal. Divorce was actually, when we had no fault divorce, when we instituted no fault divorce, that was the original redefinition of marriage, not gay marriage. Divorce was supposed to be lifelong and permanent. But through no fault divorce, what we communicated is divorce is not an institution centered around the well being of children. Divorce is a vehicle of adult fulfillment. And if you are unhappy in your marriage, that means the marriage can cease to exist. Well, people who supported same sex marriage took that idea and just ran with it. They said, well, if marriage is just a vehicle of adult fulfillment, I would be fulfilled and happy if I was married to somebody of the opposite sex, or somebody of the same sex. So no fault divorce legally was the beginning of the breakdown of the family. And now we've seen it continue on through these various stages. But the impacts on children of divorce are severe and really serious. And honestly, we've ignored them for too long. For kids with same sex parents, the main struggle that they experience is mother hunger and father hunger. This idea that if you are raised, and I saw in the comments, I can't help but like peek at him, right? That somebody said, well, isn't it the same for kids with single parents? And the answer is absolutely, right? Somebody with a single mom and somebody with double moms are still going to experience father hunger. 10 mothers cannot replace the love of a father. You cannot replace the need for a child for a father in their life. I've even had like friends whose husbands are in the military and deployed for a year, and their dad is gone. And then their little 6-year-old starts to call every man in his life daddy, because something inside of him says, I need a daddy. I want a daddy. Will you be my daddy? I'm craving a daddy. Well, that's not unique to kids with same-sex parents. That's just what it means to be a human child. You long to be loved by a man and woman, your own mother and father. And then we profiled the stories of kids created through third-party reproduction, whether it's sperm donation, egg donation, or surrogacy. These kids struggle with a lot of identity issues because they have been completely cut off from their genetic parent, one or both. They struggle with feelings of commodification, that they were bought and sold because they were bought and sold. You can Google right now, egg donor catalog, and you can look at all the different options with different scales of pricing based on the genetic material that you want for your child's mother or biological mother. And they struggle with a lot of household instability as well. Many of them are troubled that there was a lot of eugenic practices that took place during their conception. And so all of these kids have some similarities: children of divorce, children with same-sex parents, children created through reproductive technologies. Probably the main thing that binds them together is that they are doing hard things for the adults in their life. They were forced to sacrifice some of their natural rights so the adults in their world could live as they please, have the family they desire, whatever. So, adults are supposed to be understanding, supportive, and accommodating for children. In all of these categories, you see a reversal, right? Where the children need to be supportive, understanding, and accommodating so that the adults can have what they want. So, this severing of a child's relationship with their mother or father, it's devastating. It usually has lifelong impacts, and it manifests itself different ways in different forms of modern family. But what they all have at their core is forcing adults to sacrifice so adults can live as they please.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I hear really frequently is, well, children are resilient. They'll be fine. And that is just not what the studies are showing. We've had several decades now of the modern family, of non-traditional families, and the data is not bearing out that self-soothing comment that the children will be fine, they're resilient. If anything, the parents, adults should be expected to be resilient. We have decades more of coping skills and access to counselors and things like that that we can draw from if we need to. But yeah, to to put our desires above a child's need is something that comes with consequences for that child, and really now we're seeing for all of society.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that's exactly right. That there's really these are really hard situations. Like, and I don't minimize. Like, in my other life, I'm a pastor's wife, so we do lots of marital counseling for people in struggling marriages. I've walked that really difficult road of infertility with friends, and it's crushing. I have incredible friends who have same-sex attraction or who identify as gay and lesbian, who would be incredible parents. I know the career woman who's 42 and would be a wonderful mom and hasn't found Mr. Right and is just dying to be a mom. In all of these situations, adults are facing very hard things. And someone's going to do the hard thing. It's either going to be the adult who works out the difficult marriage, who deals with the infertility issues without going for the third party route, who a same-sex attracted person who forms their family in a way that respects children's rights and not in a way that aligns with their romantic desires, the single woman who figures out how to express her mothering without creating an intentionally fatherless child. In all of these situations, either the adult or the child will have to do the hard thing. At them before us, we think it should be the adults that do the hard thing, because the only other option is making the kid do something that they simply don't have the strength to do.
yeah, that's a really great and valuable and important perspective. So I have several more questions. I could ask you questions all day long, but we have limited time, unfortunately, and we have some questions coming in from the chat. So let me ask you, how has the legalization of same-sex marriage affected traditional marital norms of fidelity, exclusivity, and permanence?
Oh my gosh. Really, really good. And so what fidelity, exclusivity, and permanence, why do we even care? Why do we even care about those things? Right. And for the modern definition of family, right? If marriage is just an institution of adult fulfillment, they don't matter. Fidelity, exclusivity, and permanence. But from a child-centric perspective, the kid needs all of this, right? Fidelity, right? Only with one another, just the two of them. That's really important, because what we see is the presence of an unrelated adult diminishes outcomes for kids. Like permanence, the kid doesn't just need their mom and dad for 2 months or 2 years or 12 years. The kid needs their mom and dad for their entire life, right? So we see that all of these marital norms, they actually have a very child-specific outcome. And if marriage is not about children, which is the going definition of marriage these days, if it's just about adult fulfillment, then none of those norms really matter anymore. In fact, a lot of those norms really get in the way of what a lot of adults want, right? And so now we're seeing that because we no longer have these norms that are child-centric, because we no longer have a child-centric understanding of marriage, since the definition of marriage today simply seems to be whatever makes adults happy. Well, now we see places like Somerville, Massachusetts, which legalized group marriage last June, because there's no longer any legal recourse against polygamy, right? If marriage is just a vehicle to fulfill adults, well, some adults are fulfilled by marrying 7 other people. So when we step away from a child-centric definition of marriage, you lose the ability to limit marriage in any way at all, and to reinforce those critical norms that actually have made this the most child-friendly institution the world has ever known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I heard on a podcast I think 2 nights ago about an organization that's working hard to normalize pedophilia by referring to it as minor attracted persons or something like that. It's it's clearly all about these adults, and there are all these videos of these adults on the website talking about their attractions, their desires, what they want. There weren't any children who were interviewed saying, "What do you want? What do you need?" And even if they were, we can trust the studies that are showing what children need. years later, after following children throughout their childhood, throughout their adulthood, we see that that what children need is very different than what is the most desirable, convenient for adults and their feelings. I want to go to another question. This is an excellent question. All of these are really. Many people today say that they are fiscally conservative but socially liberal. How does the breakdown of marriage and the family affect our fiscal policy and our liberty from state control?
Yep, so good. In chapter 1 of our book, we have a section called Why Democrats Should Care About Children's Rights. And we talk about why all of these different social ills that they are battling, right? Like my friends who are liberal are bleeding hearts. They're so tender. They desperately want justice to be done in the world. They are grieved about the fact that we've got these massive high incarceration rates and that kids are dropping out of school, and especially that minority kids are struggling in school and that kids are dealing with suicide ideation and all of that. And our message to them is, you will never achieve any level of social justice until you secure justice for the individual child, because 70 to 85% of kids who are incarcerated are fatherless. 63% of kids who commit suicide are fatherless. 67% of teen pregnancies come from fatherless homes. 90% of youth on the street are fatherless. Every single thing that you are trying to fix with tons of money and volunteer hours and government programs ultimately come down to these kids did not have a dad and a mom loving each other in the home. You don't get social justice, none of you, on anything, unless you secure justice for the individual child. Mm-hmm. And then we have a section that says why Republicans should care about children's rights. And that is, if you really want a small government, if you want personal responsibilities, if you want to stop spending so much money on school counselors and welfare programs, then you have got to support children's rights to be known, loved, and raised by both their mother and father. Because if you don't, you're just paying the billions of dollars to stem the flow from that primal child wound, right? There's no way to limit spending if you do not heal a child from the very beginning. I quote a guy in the book, David Upham at the University of Dallas, who said, small government requires big marriage. It's one or the other. You either have big government and small marriage, or big marriage and small government. You've got to choose. There is no such thing. I mean, if you want to be fiscally conservative, then you need to be socially conservative in the traditional sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent answer. Yeah, I was about to say that's another one of my favorite parts of the book, but then I would they're all my favorite parts. So get the book. That's what I'm going to say. We have another question here. Do you have any advice on how an adult child of divorce, adoption, or loss of a parent could go about trying to explain their experiences to their parents? It's a great question.
So the answer hopefully is patiently and honestly. So one of the things we do at Them Before Us is we gather stories, and I've noticed a trend here. First of all, we don't talk to kids who are under 18, right? There's just too much going on, and we don't go out and find anybody. People come to us. But what I've noticed is that very few kids are able to honestly process this until they've been out of the home for 10 years. That you need a little bit of distance from your childhood to process, contextualize. Certainly you need to not necessarily be under their in financial dependence to them to be able to kind of see this clearly. So oftentimes people start to process these questions in their late 20s and in their 30s, sometimes not until you become a parent yourself. And then some of the loss you experienced, some of the deprivation, the struggle, the challenges almost hit you like a freight train. And you go, oh my gosh, that was so hard, and I've never acknowledged it before. What I hope is that you are in a position where you can honestly talk to your parents about it. What's fascinating is that children of divorce often have the hardest time with this because they are still being the go-between for warring parents. They are still trying to keep their mother's new husband happy, right? They are still trying to navigate 2 Christmases. They have stopped being obviously the center of their parents' world, and they have been the one that's been juggling the 2 worlds forever. And sometimes even adults in their 40s are still doing that, which is amazing to me. So sometimes your parents may not be receptive to it, but if they are, you may want to start just honestly and simply and say, when you left my mom, you really threw me into a tailspin. It took me a while to recover from it. And I just want to let you know that that's created a little bit of a wedge between you and me. Honest, simple. Sometimes people are not open to this. I think that they mentioned adoption. Earlier on in some of the earlier kind of waves of adoption, there was certainly a narrative of kid needs parents, parents need kid, ding, everything's fixed, right? Or this child is so lucky to have been adopted. This child should be grateful to have been adopted. And while that may be true some of the time, that child actually suffered an incredible loss and what very likely is a primal wound before they could find that forever family. And oftentimes that adoption as redemptive, which it is, narrative, totally clouded over, obscured, and diminished the amount of loss that kids experienced. These days, adoptive parents like me, we aren't trained, or the discussions that happen in our home study is not, you're going to fix all these kids' problems, they're so lucky to have you, but rather adoption is a lifelong process where these kids are going to unpack it and explore and come to different conclusions and grieve through this as they grow in different ways. Are you ready for that? That's what our social worker talks with us about. So if the person asking the question is 50, the parents probably came to adoption with a really different perspective. These days, hopefully adoptees will be in a place where they can be a little more open, even as they're growing, about some of the struggles or challenges that growing up without your biological parents presents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. It's so important. One of the things I noticed was, as you laid out what a lot of adoption agencies require today and what process they take people through, I realized, wow, this is a process that is needed. I don't know if everybody is doing what you said, but it's wonderful, it's excellent, and explains why it's so expensive to adopt children. There is a really critical process and long process to go through when it's about the child and the child's needs. And I love that.
It shouldn't be easy to detach a child from their parents and attach them to biological strangers. That should not be a fast or easy process.
Right, right. And I love the distinction you make, though, between adoption being focused on the need and right of a child versus other forms of creating families being centered around the desires of the adults. Again, that's a central point to all of them before us. Every chapter you made.
And if we could just dwell on that really fast, like whenever, especially I'm talking to Christian audiences, they get, wait a minute, you're against adoption, right? And the answer is no. Adoption, when it's properly understood, is a child-centric institution. And we contrast that with reproductive technologies, which function as a marketplace to meet adult demands. So we have a whole chapter on that, chapter 9 in our book, so that you can be confident in responding to that. You can and should be pro-adoption and categorically against manufacturing orphans through big fertility.
Yeah, and I actually think that this is a really important point to make for traditional heterosexual couples, even as they're dating. We have to keep in mind the needs of children. If we're going after partners, men, if a woman is going after a man because he's hot, because he has muscles, because he has some certain height requirement, because he whatever, these superficial things that have nothing to do with what a child needs, what a family needs, and they have everything to do with what gives me tingles and what makes me feel all, happy inside, we are setting ourselves up for a disaster down the road. So yeah, so for I just want to make that point for people for whom homosexuality and non-traditional marriage has not affected them at all. That this is an important point for every partnering up, even heterosexual, for sure. So let's see. Do we have time for? I think we have another question here that we have time for. Where can people go to find secret support groups or support groups that will maintain their anonymity for people who have been adopted or who have been raised by same-sex partners, or even really children of divorce, children who have experienced any of the types of losses that we've talked about?
There are a lot of adoptee groups out there, I think, where adoptees can find support and be honest about some of their loss. There are now a lot of donor conceived groups that are also developing. That community is really coming together, finding their voice. We Are Donor Conceived is one of them. Donor Children is another one. And so there is support for those kinds of family structures, kids created through reproductive technologies. When it comes to kids, children of divorce, there's good divorce support groups. I think even you can find some in churches and things like that. Lila Miller has done some really great work on this, specifically on divorce. She's got a whole book just kind of capturing the stories of adults who have experienced divorce. Is really good. I think it's called Primal Loss. In terms of kids who have same-sex parents and LGBT parents, as far as I know, we are the only place that is cataloging their stories and creating support groups for kids with LGBT parents or same-sex parents. So you can contact me if you fall into that group or know somebody who might need that kind of support. I will say, I will check you out and I will vet you. I'm really protective about who gets in there, just because these kids don't have, there's no other place. I wish you could understand how they can't be honest with anybody. They can't talk to their parents. If they talk to their friends will be like, you should be so lucky you had two moms. I mean, they literally won't even hear, I desperately wanted a father. I think my development suffered because of it. And it's just like everything in the world, even counselors, they'll go to counselors and they'll say, I really struggled when my father transitioned to a woman because I feel like I lost my dad. And the counselor will say, you should affirm his new identity, her new identity, right? So, I mean, if that's the case where you are, you absolutely send me a message and then we're going to talk for a little while.
Excellent. Excellent. I love all of the work that you're doing. It's fantastic. I'd like to end with a final question. We talked a lot about the impact on children of the quote modern family or non-traditional families. Where do we go from here? Is there anything we can do?
Yes. You become a children's rights activist. I'm sorry, that's like the only thing that you can do. You already are doing it when it comes to the pro-life cause, right? You're like, I have to protect that kid. Take that mentality, bring it onto this side of the womb and start doing it for kids over here as it relates to family, because the threats are not over. I mean, the threats will keep coming. There are so many different ways that children's rights to their mother and father are being impacted. That train is going to keep going into the station, more in terms of legalization of polygamy, more in terms of normalization of dystopic ways that we are creating babies in laboratories. By the way, only 7% of babies created in a laboratory will be born alive. This whole IVF thing, it is not a child-friendly process. It's not. We are treating children as disposable objects. Some of the ways that we are writing our parenthood laws these days, in essence, make children items to be acquired by adults who can afford them. And so we go through all of that in our book, all of the threats to children's rights. And so, like, the health of our entire society is on the line. We call this the greatest battle of our time, because really it is this or nothing. Either we do this or we don't get anything we want. Not Republicans, not Democrats, not people who want our society to thrive, not people who care about the individual hearts of kids. Like, we have to do this. So I'm so grateful that you're spotlighting the book, because we put it all in there. The only result of finishing the book is you going, and now we fight, right? And like, now you're gonna know like who is being victimized, how it's happening, and what you can do to help. And the first part is just recognizing like kids have rights and no one's gonna defend it except me.
Yeah, that's excellent. Absolutely excellent. I'm glad you also mentioned in vitro fertilization. I think that's something that Christians don't have nearly the knowledge about or understanding of, the implications of that for the unborn. And again, that and all of these other topics are in the book. Thank you, Katy, for coming on to Voices of WIA. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for the tireless work that you and your team do day in and day out. I am a huge fan of yours. All of us at Women in Apologetics are really grateful for you, really grateful for your book. Most of us have read it by now. And it's really an outstanding work from an important and critical angle. Anybody, as you've said repeatedly, who has any interest in our society thriving, whether you're Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, attracted to your own gender or not, everybody has an interest in this information, whether they know it or not. So thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you for joining us. And that concludes today's episode of Voices of WIA. It's been a great time with Katy discussing the devastating impact of same-sex marriage on children and other non-traditional types of families on children. If you'd like to know more about our guest and find resources on this topic, visit thembeforeus.com. We also have a recommended reading list on our website under the resources menu, appropriately titled Recommended Reading List. And next month, we'd love for you to join us for a conversation with Dr. Jana Harmon as we discuss the birth of Jesus and the Christmas story. So be on the lookout for the date and details on our social media. If you don't already follow Women in Apologetics on social media, look for us on Facebook and Instagram. And finally, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel to access more content like this. Thanks so much for joining us.